Welcome to our debate. We will be discussing the pros and cons to implementing punishment procedures as part of an ABA program. This debate will be conducted as a formal debate. My name is Elizabeth Huxell, and I'll be the role as the moderator for this debate. I will now introduce the rest of the members of our debate. Arguing for the use of punishment is Sarah French as the stater, Heather Richards as the prover, and Amanda Liebenman as the attacker. Arguing against the use of punishment procedures are Michaela Gray as the stater, Daniel Keenan as the prover, and Mary Haggard as the attacker. Before we begin the debate, I would like to take a moment to first define punishment and reinforcement procedures. After the occurrence of a behavior, there is a consequence that immediately follows a behavior. This is either punishment or reinforcement. Punishment, defined by Cooper, Heron, and Heward, is defined as an environmental change that decreases the future frequency of the behavior. Reinforcement, defined by Cooper and colleagues, defines reinforcement as an environmental change that increases the future frequency of the behavior. The following figure illustrates the different types of reinforcement and different types of punishment. So as you can see from the figure, positive reinforcement is when a preferred stimulus is added following the behavior. This often looks like a reward. When a non-preferred stimulus is removed, the individual is able to gain escape. This is called negative reinforcement. Adding a non-preferred aversive stimulus following a behavior is positive punishment. And removing a preferred stimulus following behavior is negative punishment. As you can see by the figure, reinforcement increases the future frequency of behavior and punishment decreases the future frequency of behavior. An example of positive punishment, often confused with negative reinforcement, is shown in the following video.
Psychologists perform operant conditioning with punishment. Maybe we can come up with a punishment for straying off topic.
Not getting to see you wins at pigeon ping pong comes to mind.
We could snap a rubber band on our wrists every time we get sidetracked.
Not bad. You know, in medieval times, idle chatter was punished with a device called the scold's bridle. It's an iron cage that's locked around the head and pierces the tongue.
Only we had one.
Oh, well, check Amazon.
Okay, so we agree. Whenever someone takes us off topic, they get their arm hair yanked off.
I really don't let that happen, or the girl who does my eyebrows will think I've been cheating on her.
All right, now, one benefit of quantum coupling.
Well, no question. Who decides if someone's gone off topic?
I think it'll be pretty clear. If not, we'll take a vote. Oh, also.
Ow! We didn't vote.
We didn't have to. That was clearly a tangent. Now, come on, back to work. If we're leaning towards quantum coupling, then we should.
You said quantum coupling. That made me think of the show Quantum Leap. That's a tangent, and it's your fault.
Ridiculous. Sheldon, I vote that is not a tangent.
Yeah, thank you. And now I owe you one.
Yeah. That was your fault.
That is a lot of hair. And I'm going to hear it from Jenny.
Everyone stop. This was a stupid idea. Negative reinforcement isn't working.
I think you mean positive punishment. Negative reinforcement is the removal of a positive stimulus. It's a common mistake.
Reinforcement is really wrong.
Well, it's used incorrectly all the time. Even Bill Murray makes that mistake in the first scene of Ghostbusters.
No way. It's not Bill Murray.
I'm studying the effect of negative reinforcement on ESP ability.
Bill Murray did get it wrong.
Jump ahead to the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
No!
Leonard's right. We can't just jump ahead. We have to watch the whole movie.
So some may argue that by increasing positive behavior utilizing reinforcement strategies, punishment procedures, consequences that decrease behavior may not be necessary. So now it is time to begin the debate. We will begin by discussing benefits of implementing punishment-based procedures. The stater for positive pro-punishment will bring up the main points by the group, followed by the prover for pro-punishment, who will attempt to prove the main points made by the stater. Next, the attacker for pro-punishment will be able to probe their opposing team for weaknesses in their arguments. Next, the members arguing punishment procedures are not necessary will be able to argue their points. The stater for anti-punishment will be discussing how punishment procedures are not necessary for effective programming, followed by the prover for anti-punishment, who will attempt to prove the points made by the stater. And finally, the attacker for pro-punishment will probe their opposing team for weaknesses in their argument. Last, the stater from each side will end by summarizing the points made by the team, and each team will have time at the end to answer questions submitted following the debate. We will begin with pro-punishment by having Sarah French state the main points.
Today, for the pro-punishment side, we have Heather and Mary debating. Heather plans to prove why she is pro-punishment in ABA, while Mary will attack Heather's statements. Heather and Mary will be debating whether punishment is effective, whether punishment is ethical, and when punishment is appropriate to use. Both sides have multiple sources to support their claims.
Heather, the prover for pro-punishment, will cite some research.
Hi, I'm Heather, and I'm going to begin the debate speaking about the effectiveness of punishment. As Elizabeth has stated, that punishment can be one of two things. It can be the addition of a stimulus to the environment or the removal of a stimulus immediately following a behavior which decreases the future frequency of the behavior. I'm now going to address some misconceptions of punishment. The first is punishment is painful. Punishment in ABA is an outcome-based strategy. It is not harmful as in the procedural definition. Because of its history, it may conjure up images of electric shock or corporal punishment, but ABA uses research to evidence-based procedures by highly trained professionals to implement adjustments to the environment to improve the quality of an individual's behavior. If we take a look at the 4 consequences of behavior in this diagram, some examples of punishment in relation to reinforcement are listed. So positive reinforcement, as said before, is a consequence that adds something to increase the future likelihood of behavior. So for example, if you studied for a test and you got an A, it's more likely that you will study for the next test so that you would get an A as well. On the other side, positive punishment would be the same consequence, adds something to the environment, but the future likelihood of the behavior decreases. So, for example, if you attempted a physical feat and sustained an injury, you probably won't do that again, so your behavior has decreased. With negative reinforcement, the consequence removes something, and the future of likelihood of the behavior increases. So if you smell trash and you take it out, you're probably going to continue to do that in the future. With negative punishment, the consequence also removes something from the environment, and the future likelihood of behavior decreases. So for example, you're driving recklessly, your license gets revoked, you're probably not going to drive recklessly in the future. Another misconception is that punishment is implemented as an initial treatment. Punishment is mainly used as a supplement to reinforce, with reinforcement to enhance functional outcomes. So least restrictive procedures are always used first, and punishment is the last resort. Many factors will be taken into consideration before deciding to use a punishment procedure, such as the individual's health, their background, previous interventions that have been used, and the positive outcome to be achieved must outweigh the risk for the punishment procedure to be used. There are times, though, when behavior is so severe that it is endangering the lives of others or of the individual, and the punishment procedure may be the only option. For example, a child who is climbing out of a second-story window whenever the adult walks out of the room and has sustained continuous serious injuries like broken bones, more intensive interventions may be the most effective in regards to that type of situation. The next is that punishment is forced. Some feel that punishment in ABA is forced, and punishment occurs daily in its natural form all the time, as we saw before in the previous slide. Other examples from applied behavior analysis include response cost, which is a penalty. So if you hit your sister and lose your allowance, that's your penalty. Timeout would be something like yelling and you get removed from the classroom or you go to detention. Overcorrection is having the individual engage in an effortful behavior. So if they bite a classmate, the infamous punishment of filling the blackboard in with "I will not bite," as you can see, may be implemented. All of these procedures are minimally intrusive, and they're effective when the result of the behavior is to lose something that is valuable to the individual, or if they're engaging in something that might be so annoying that it deters them from future incidents of behavior. These can be very effective with minimal risks of side effects. If we take a look at the Behavior Analyst Certification Board professional and ethical compliance codes that relate to punishment, 2.09, the treatment and intervention efficacy, in which clients have the right to the most effective treatment. If an intervention, including punishment procedures, are withheld, it could be considered unethical. Also, code 4.08, considerations regarding punishment. Behavior analysts recommend reinforcement before using punishment whenever possible. Punishment is used in addition to reinforcement to strengthen the intervention. And behavior analysts implementing punishment procedures have been received supervised training to ensure the most effective and ethical treatment is provided and that the procedures are executed correctly. To establish punishment as an appropriate treatment, behavior analysts will always conduct some form of assessment to determine the function of the behavior prior to creating a behavior change plan. This is the same as with other interventions as well as punishment. So when used in conjunction with reinforcement-based or functional skills training, punishment has shown reduction of problem behavior with the improvement of the positive functional skills that are being reinforced. There have been many studies over the last 2 decades that have shown punishment to be effective with other interventions to successfully reduce challenging behaviors. One of them is the use of functional communication training with punishment, and there have been many studies that it has been proven effective over multiple procedures, some of them including one study where it was FCT plus extinction and FCT alone that was reducing severe aggression, self-injurious, and dangerous behaviors. And the following studies by Hagopian, Fisher, and Hanley and colleagues all have that within. And here is a chart of the Hagopian and colleagues study where the responses per minute of problem behaviors, FCT plus punishment, had been significantly more effective than the other interventions. The punishment seemed to be pretty effective, but then along with FCT, it was much more effective. Also over here with demand fading. And also you can tell that it's been used at the very end. So only when other methods have failed to stabilize the behavior was punishment used as an intervention. Other examples of reinforcement being effective with punishment, differential rates of low rates of behavior plus punishment. There was a study where it was effective to reduce severe aggression in males, and that was Shaw and Sims in 2009. Differential reinforcement plus overcorrection was effective over match stimulation, response cost, and overcorrection alone in decreasing vocal stereotypy, and that was Anderson and Lee in 2011. Also, empirically derived consequences, which are reinforcers and punishers in combination, were shown to reduce severe pica, self-injurious behaviors, aggression, and dangerous acts when no other methods were successful. And that was in the article by Fisher and colleagues in 1994. So to recap, punishment is only used when other methods of behavioral intervention have failed. When punishment is used as a supplement to strengthen the effectiveness in conjunction with other behavioral techniques, it has proven very effective. If the BACB ethical code is followed, those implementing any procedure will be sufficiently trained to do so safely. And according to Cooper, Heron, and Heward of 2007, the use of punishment is to be as a temporary means for behavior reduction that will be faded and ultimately eliminated so the individual can be returned to least restrictive procedures. And I will give it back to Elizabeth.
All right, thank you, Heather. Next, we'll have Mary, the attacker, provide a response.
All right. So, get this up here. Reinforcement of desired behaviors have been as equally effective at reducing problem behavior in individuals with autism without the use of punishment procedures or aversive conditions. So to begin, I would just like to refer back to the Code of Ethics, Code 4.0A Part A, which was previously mentioned, states that behavioral analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment procedures whenever possible. So this means that as behavior analysts, we are ethically required and responsible to research and implement reinforcement procedures prior to any punishment procedures when working with individuals with autism. So reinforcement alone has been shown to decrease problem behaviors in individuals with autism. And in addition, reinforcement also teaches socially significant behaviors in which punishment does not. So that is a difference between punishment and reinforcement. And again, that punishment does not teach new behaviors and reinforcement does. So according to Reese-Peterson, reinforcement by its very nature teaches and refines new behaviors that can easily be used to replace problem behaviors. So functional communication training that was previously discussed, or FCT as it's commonly called, is a common reinforcement procedure that is used with individuals with autism. According to Geiger, Canine, Carr, and LeBlanc, 2010, functional communication training also decreases problem behavior while actively targeting a communication skill. So again, it addresses the problem behavior, but it also teaches the individual something as well. So FCT is used to teach individuals to maybe ask for help or to ask for a break without the need to engage in problem behavior to escape aversive situations or task demands. It could also be used to teach individuals how to appropriately ask for desired items or activities without the need to engage in problem behavior. So the Prover for Punishment did cite different research studies in which functional communication training in combination with punishment procedures was effective at reducing problem behaviors in individuals with autism. However, Falcomata, Roanne, Muthing, Stevenson, and Ng, 2012, they did complete a study in which functional communication training combined with a chain schedule reinforcement was used to decrease problem behavior in 2 children with autism. The results in the study showed that not only was there a decrease in behavior, but both children showed an increase in spontaneous communication. So again, this demonstrates how reinforcement reduces the problem behavior and also teaches new socially significant behaviors. So again, referring back to the Code of Ethics, as behavioral analysts, we are ethically required to implement reinforcement procedures like functional communication training prior to exploring punishment procedures. And as shown in the studies, functional communication training alone was used to decrease behaviors. So the proof for punishment did cite different research studies that discussed combination, both reinforcement and punishment to address problem behaviors in individuals with autism. However, Geiger, Canine, Carr, and LeBlanc, 2010, identified different reinforcement procedures that alone can decrease problem behaviors, and these are often used in individuals with autism. So some of these include activity choice. So the individual determines when and in what order they will complete tasks. Functional communication training, which was previously discussed on both sides. Demand fading, in which all tasks are taken away, then slowly faded back into the individual's repertoire, and non-contingent reinforcement. So again, restating, going back to the Code of Ethics, we are ethically required to explore these reinforcement procedures, such as those discussed prior to any punishment procedures. And again, they have been proven to be effective alone at addressing problem behaviors and reducing them. So there are negative side effects that can occur when punishment procedures are implemented. So according to Mattson and Kasdan, 1981, undesirable side effects occur less often with reinforcement techniques aimed at reducing undesirable behaviors than with punishment. So Cooper, Heron, and Heward did identify different side effects of punishment. Some of these include physical aggression, self-injurious behavior, avoidance or escape, and behavioral contrast. Now, these side effects, they can be harmful to the client as well as individuals who are in contact with the client, which could be other peers or other behavioral therapists. Mayhew and Harris in 1978 did complete a study that involved 2 adolescents with autism who engaged in self-stimulatory behavior. So punishment was used as an intervention. It was the only intervention to aimed at decreasing these behaviors. And when punishment was implemented, both participants displayed side effects. So one participant displayed physical aggression towards the researcher, and the other participant demonstrated an increase in avoidance of the researcher. So I have a graph to share. There we go. Oh. Okay, so the graph, we're looking at the bottom graph, and you can see the a red line that shows that, now this is the graph showing the participant who engaged in physical aggression. So you can see before punishment was, punishment's right here, before punishment was implemented or introduced, the client did not engage in any physical aggression. So once punishment was implemented, he engaged in physical aggression. So he went from no physical aggression to a spike in physical aggression. It kind of goes back up, and then when punishment was taken away, it's back down to an absence of physical aggression. So, Cooper, Heron, and Heward, 2007, did state that any behavior change program must be physically safe for all that involved. And the negative side effects involved in punishment procedures, they do have the ability to be harmful, which does not make a safe behavior change program. And that concludes my portion.
All right, thank you, Mary. Next, we will go with this second stater, Michaela, for her points.
Okay, for anti-punishment, Daniel and Amanda will be debating whether reinforcement and its effect on behavior, how ethics plays a role in reinforcement versus punishment, the lack of research that's associated with punishment. Studies showing reinforcement or punishment can be successful. Punishment does not have to be intense, and punishment may work over reinforcement for certain people.
Thank you, and Daniel, the prover for anti-punishment, will cite his points.
Okay, so the literature shows that reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, has a more lasting effect on behavior than punishment. Punishment can be effective in rapidly reducing a behavior in the short term, but has been shown through research that it loses its effectiveness as soon as the punisher is removed fairly rapidly. So it's not a good choice for long-term behavior change. According to the same study by Spradlin in 2002 in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, punishment must be intense or extremely aversive to maintain its effect on behavior after it has been removed. This lessens its utility both from a practical and an ethical standpoint. People with autism should not be harmed as a part of their treatment, and they are also entitled to an effective treatment. This causes a troubling situation. It becomes very difficult to cause no harm and to be effective if you need to use very intense aversive punishments. It's very hard to meet both of those, the need to be both effective and to do no harm at the same time. Section 4.09 of the Ethics Code calls for the least restrictive procedure possible. And clearly intense and aversive punishment by definition cannot be the least restrictive procedure possible when reinforcement strategies are available. It is not worth the fast results that punishment can provide in the beginning to break the code of ethics of the profession and to risk the side effects of the punishment procedure. There's a lack of scientific research into mild punishers as well. That means that, like stated by Spradlin above, you have to use intense punishers to get the results that you're ultimately looking for. But along with that, according to Lerman and Vorndren in 2002 in the Journal for Applied Behavior Analysis, they showed that you also have to have a punisher that is unconditioned punisher. This means that punishers must not only be intense, but must also be unconditioned to the person that you're applying them to. Unconditioned punishers are those things that lessen a behavior because they're naturally punishing. Practically speaking, it is a challenge to find enough unconditioned punishers that do not require a contingency that is built into them to be true punishers. To depend on that over a long period of time to be able to find enough things that are naturally or punishing or are unconditioned punishers is logistically would be very difficult to do with any sort of reliability. Maintaining use of unconditioned punishers over long periods of time creates logistical issues that make punishment extremely difficult to rely on, providing services that are effective and least restrictive, once again, very hard to rely on over time. All ethical issues aside, we must provide treatment that relies on the best research possible. Unconditioned punishers have been shown by the research to be the best practice when using punishment. If it is not possible to use the best practice the way it should be administered, then it should not be used. And I contend that The research by Lerman and Vorndran shows that it can't be consistently and reliably used. And since that's the way to get the best result from punishment is through unconditioned punishment, then it shouldn't be used at all. Section 2.09 of the Ethics Code touches on two important points. First, behavior analysts have the obligation to educate and advocate for the most effective treatment. And along with that, the procedures must have a scientific evidence base proving that they're not only the most effective treatment in the short term, but also in the long term. Punishment does not meet these demands of the Ethics Code. There are several well-documented negative side effects, as was touched on earlier, that I wanted to go into a little more detail on. According to Newsom, Favell, and Ringcover, 1983, in a paper called The Effects of Punishment on Human Behavior, they went over in detail some of the side effects that can take place when punishment procedures are used. Punishment often fails to stop and can even increase behaviors. Since attention is one of the most potent rewards available, and since it's difficult to punish without giving any attention, it can actually become a reinforcer even when it's meant to be a punisher. Punishment also arouses strong emotional responses, and that can generalize and lead to more significant behavioral problems than you are looking to deal with in the first place. Internal control of behavior is not learned, meaning basically someone may learn to inhibit a behavior when they're being surveilled, but that doesn't mean that they've actually learned why they're inhibiting that behavior. They just do to avoid the punishment. And punishment also occurs best when it occurs every time. So while the rewards are for reinforcement are best when given intermittently, punishment works best on a continuous basis. So the degree of vigilance required to constantly monitor and punish every occurrence of a behavior is rarely possible in the real world. So the undesired behavior is usually intermittently reinforced when it is not punished, and the behavior can actually continue at a higher rate than it did before. So for these reasons, I argue that punishment procedures are not ethical or best practice in ABA. And that concludes my portion.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Amanda, the attacker, will now respond.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So there are many studies that show that either reinforcement or punishment can be a successful intervention given the circumstances. When Constantini and Hooving evaluated the effectiveness of punishment versus reward by using 40 kindergartners and 40 second graders, the one group was given a reward for response inhibition, while the other was punished for not demonstrating response inhibition. The results showed us that in this example, that punishment was the most successful intervention. Based on a case-by-case basis, in some instances, punishment is more effective than a reinforcement procedure. Adron and Holtz also pointed out that sometimes all of the other reasons should be eliminated in order to prevent an event. For example, if there weren't police officers out on the road to give you a ticket, then people would most likely speed more often. But the fact that there are police officers on the road to prevent this, people might not speed as often. So this might also reduce the number of accidents per year, which could also reduce trauma, reckless driving, and even death. This shows us that in some circumstances, more reductive methods should be used. There are also many people that might think that punishment needs to be intense in order to be effective and remain effective, but this isn't always the case. According to Lerman and Borneman, the assumption that a more intense punisher will be more effective is not commonly supported in current literature. In fact, according to Bailey and Birch, one person might find a punishment to be more effective while another may not. We can use this example that if someone yells at their toddler no before they touch the stove, this can be effective enough and the toddler might not need any further reprimands, like a slap on the wrist, while another child might need a firm tone and a slap on the wrist for them to know that this is dangerous and should not be attempted again. Punishment procedures are only effective when tailored for the client or for the person that it's being used on. Ethics Code 4.09 was established in order to protect and ensure safe human treatment. Punishment is not always inhumane, and as stated previously, needed for some cases. There are many resources to help BCBAs make sure that they are conducting a punishment procedure safely and correctly. According to Cooper and his colleagues, sometimes punishment is the best procedure to use based off of the assessments that are related to the case. Every punisher needs to be unconditioned or intense to be effective. At one point in time, one is taught the word hot. What hot means. If a mother raises her voice in a panic when their child is putting the steaming hot soup to their lips, be careful, the soup is hot, then this might prevent the child from getting burned. This example does not contain an extreme or unconditioned punisher. This reprimand was used for the best of the child and was in the form of a reprimand because of the urgency of the situation. Another punisher that is not intense in most examples would be response blocking, which I have a graph for. In this example, the baseline shows that the mouthing instances were increased, while when using response blocking, the instances were decreased significantly. While there are risks for possible side effects when using punishment, they can often be minimized in order to prevent things like emotional or aggressive reactions. While there are reports of respondent and operant aggression, there are still many articles that have little to no aggressive behavior after the punisher is used. Another side effect of punishment might be that the punisher is ineffective over time. However, there are many times that there needs to be an immediate punisher, like a reprimand, present in order to stop the behavior promptly. For example, if someone is given a ticket for reckless driving, which they have to pay in a few weeks, this form of punishment is delayed and not immediate and might not be effective over time. If someone gets arrested and goes to jail for reckless or drunk driving, then that person would most likely be less of a reckless driver over time, not just the next time that they drove somewhere. Right, and Elizabeth, back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. We will now end with speakers from each side summarizing the points made by the team. Sarah, the stater, will go first.
To summarize the pro-punishment side, Heather made multiple points to prove her side. Heather used her sources to prove punishment is an effective form of treatment. Punishment is not harmful or painful to the client. Punishment is to be used with reinforcement or when reinforcement is ineffective. And punishment has been proven to reduce severe, aggressive, self-injurious, dangerous, and destructive behaviors. Amanda attacked Daniel's anti-punishment side to prove that there are multiple interventions that prove reinforcement or punishment to be effective. Amanda also stated that punishment does not always have to be intense, but is sometimes the most effective form of treatment in emergency situations.
Thank you, Sarah. Michaela, the stater for anti-punishment, will now summarize the points made by her team.
Okay, for anti-punishment, for summarizing it, the points made were reinforcement has more lasting effects on behavior than punishment and also pairs the reinforcer with the client. Ethics states to use the least restrictive procedures possible, which reinforcement does. Punishment could be crossing the line into an ethical violation, and punishment comes with the risk of negative side effects while reinforcement does not.
Okay, that concludes our formal debate. Both sides did a fantastic job, and I'll now ask questions to the group. The first question is, what type of information, if any, is missing in the literature on this topic? What recommendations would you make for future studies on the topic about punishment? And Amanda will answer this question.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There seems to be more information regarding the use of punishment procedures and reinforcement combined, but there is not a lot of information on just the use of punishment. This might be due to ethic number 4.09, which is what Daniel pointed out, which calls for the least restrictive procedure, which might be why reinforcement is always, almost always coincides with the punishment procedure. In research, it would be beneficial to also see the least restrictive punishment procedures alone versus the procedure paired with a reinforcement procedure to determine the effectiveness of just the punishment procedure alone. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. The second question is, what role should a behavior analyst play in interventions that involve punishment? And this question is for Daniel.
Thanks, Elizabeth. A BCBA should always oversee the implementation as well as the actual writing of a punishment procedure. A BCBA needs to oversee everyone that's going to be implementing a punishment procedure to ensure that it's being implemented with fidelity and in a way that is in line with the behavioral ethics code. The BCBA is responsible for the treatment that's given, and it ultimately is the BCBA's responsibility to ensure that what's done is both effective and follows the ethics code as the licensed professional on the team. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the third question is, what type of training or supports should be provided to teams implementing punishment procedures? And this question is for Sarah.
When implementing a punishment procedure, an increased amount of ongoing training and support should be given to the therapist. According to the Code of Ethics 4.08D, all behavior analysts should ensure that aversive procedures are accompanied by an increased level of training, supervision, and oversight. Behavior analysts must continuously evaluate the effectiveness of the aversive procedure and modify the program as needed. Behavior analysts should always include a plan to discontinue the aversive procedure once it is no longer needed.
Okay, thank you. And finally, the last question is, what are some considerations a BCBA should make before recommending a punishment procedure? And this question is for Mary.
Okay, so some considerations that BCBA can make is really, have all reinforcement procedures been exhausted, but also have they been implemented correctly? So the behavioral analyst can ensure treatment fidelity by observing the behavioral therapists who are working with the client, by observing them and observing whether or not they are taking data correctly, whether or not they are reinforcing what they should be reinforcing, and really implementing the reinforcement procedure correctly. So if the reinforcement procedure has been implemented correctly and there is no decrease in a behavior, then punishment can more than likely be applied. Another thing that a behavior analyst can consider is the data. When they're looking at data, if the data shows that reinforcement is not decreasing the behavior, then they can move to a punishment procedure. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our debate. Both sides did a great job about presenting the points about anti-punishment and pro-punishment. I think both sides conclude that punishment procedures, when implemented, can be effective, but need to go along with reinforcement procedures. They cannot be conducted alone, and they have to be trained and watch the data closely to see if reinforcement is effective, and if it's not, that punishment procedures may be implemented. And so that concludes our debate, and I hope everybody enjoyed it, and thanks everyone.
Bye.